All right, Wildcats, page 300, chapter 8, lesson 1, food energy. So we're on a new chapter. You want your name, you want the title of the class, AVID 6, probably Monday, March 15th, 2021, Science FNT, chapter 8, lesson 1, page 300, food energy in blue. Main idea/essential question in blue. Energy moves in one direction in ecosystems, from producers to consumers. Same thing there. Fold it in half. Vocabulary. Consumer, page 300. These organisms are called heterotrophs and are also called consumers. Say that word. Heterotrophs. Consumers. So, consumer, heterotrophs. Well, let's see what they do. Let's go backwards. Organisms in the other levels cannot make their own food, and thus rely on the producers for energy. Rely on producers for energy. Decomposer, page 302. Organisms called decomposers live by breaking apart once living matter into simpler parts. Decomposer, break apart once living matter. Energy pyramid, page 303. An energy pyramid shows the availability of energy at each trophic level in an ecosystem. And there's a picture of one. Energy period, availability of energy at each trophic level. Say trophic. Say availability. Practice saying these words and reading with me. You should be reading with me. Food web, page 301. Overlapping food chains in an ecosystem form a food web. Food web, overlapping food chains. Producer. Organisms that make food are known as autotrophs and are also called producers. Say that word, autotrophs. Sounds pretty similar to heterotrophs, doesn't it? Producer, autotrophs, comma, make food. Oh, look, we did that in the same format as the consumer. Which type of troph it is and what it does. Scavenger, page 302. A scavenger is an animal that eats the meat of dead animals. Scavenger eats dead meat. Trophic level. Each step in the movement of energy is known as a trophic level. Trophic level, step in movement of energy. Like here, 100% of the energy at producers, only 10% of that energy goes on to the primary consumers, and then you only end up with 1% of the original energy to the secondary consumers, and then you only end up with 0.1% at the third level consumers. Or same thing here. Energy moves from producers to primary consumers to secondary consumers in a food chain. And when they overlap, it makes a food web. All right. Trophic levels. Trophic levels. Again, read with me. Food is an organism's source of energy. As you have learned, plants and algae produce food through photosynthesis. Food equals energy. Plants and algae produce via photosynthesis. Organisms that make food are known as autotrophs and are also called producers. The producers include plants, algae, and some bacteria. So next to photosynthesis equals autotrophs, comma, producers, plus some bacteria. We already know plants, we already know algae. Also, some bacteria can do photosynthesis and are autotrophs, which means they produce their own food for energy. Wow, look at how you can get all that information from just a couple words. A plant breaks down some of its food for its own life processes. It stores the rest. Use some. Zoop, store, rest. An animal that eats a plant obtains this stored energy. Arrow, animals obtain by eating. In turn, the animal uses some of the energy and stores the rest. Use some. Zoop, store, rest. If another animal then eats the first animal, it obtains the stored energy. Another animal eats the first. Guess what's going to happen? In this way, energy flows through an ecosystem. It's going to use some and store the rest. All right, now, energy flows through an ecosystem. So, arrows, right? Energy is flowing from the producers to the first consumer to the second consumer. Oh, producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer. All right, where were we now? Here. Each step in the movement of energy is known as a trophic level. Each step equals trophic level. 1 step, 2 steps in the example that we have. Organisms in the other levels cannot make their own food and thus rely on the producers for energy. These organisms are called heterotrophs and are also called consumers. Consumers rely on producers, heterotrophs, because consumers are heterotrophs. Okay, let's see. Consumers gain their energy by eating or consuming other organisms. An organism that feeds directly on a producer is a primary consumer. So, producer, arrow, primary. In the middle. Give yourself space. You can see what's going on. You're going to need space. A mouse that eats a plant is a primary consumer. So primary, parentheses, mouse. Primary consumers make up the second trophic level in an ecosystem. First level, second level. An organism that eats a primary consumer is called a secondary consumer. A hawk that eats a mouse is a secondary consumer. So, arrow, secondary, hawk. Secondary consumers make up the third trophic level. Okay, so producers are the first level, primaries are the second level, secondaries are the third level. Sometimes you might even have another level above that, but pretty rarely. However, you can see that here in the energy pyramid. First level, second level, third level, and the fourth trophic level. Alrighty. Like other animals, this bird is a consumer. It gets the energy it needs by eating food. A food chain describes the transfer of energy from a producer to a primary consumer, then to a secondary consumer. Oh, so when it goes from producer, plant, to primary, like a mouse, to secondary, like a hawk, that equals the food chain. Now you see how the whole thing pieces together. A plant, mouse, and hawk can make up one food chain. In nature, food chains and trophic levels may overlap. Some animals eat both producers and primary consumers. For example, bears eat fruit and fish. Fruit, a plant, producer. Fish, an animal, probably a primary consumer. Some of the fish they eat may be secondary consumers that eat other fish. Oh, so they might be like these fish up here that are eating other fish, and those fish are eating plants. In addition, other animals may eat the same kind of fruit and the same kind of fish, not just the bears. Overlapping food chains in an ecosystem form a food web. Arrows between trophic levels and food chains can overlap. Arrow, they are called a food web. So, when food chains and trophic levels overlap each other, they become a food web, not just a food chain. Some food webs are mainly on land, others are in bodies of fresh water or in oceans. Some animals may belong to both, a land food web and a water food web. Okay? Belonging to both. What's an example of that? How about something like an eagle that gets fish with its claws out of the water, but might also eat like the dead meat of something. Let's say like a little fox died on the ground. The hawk might, or the eagle might come along and eat some of that, but it also might catch fish out of the water. Okay, sequence. What is transferred along a food chain? Well, let's look up here at trophic levels in food chains. Producers, trees, ferns, and mosses, and algae. Notice they're doing something, an example on land and an example in the water. Primary consumers like squirrels, deer, birds, and insects eat things from the trees and the ferns and the mosses and the grasses. Herring and other small fish and baleen whales eat the algae. Then the next level up from that, the owls, the wolves, and the snakes eat these poor little squirrels and the deer and the birds and the insects. In the water, sharks, dolphins, and tuna eat the smaller fish. Okay, so what's transferred along a food chain? Well, a food chain is the movement of something from a producer to a primary consumer to a secondary consumer. And up here we said food is energy. So the thing that is transferred along a food chain is literally energy. All right, let's go ahead and turn the page. Now, we had 2, 4, 6 pages. That means we're doing 3 pages per day because it's divided in half. So let's do this page of scavengers and decomposers. Scavengers and decomposers. What happens to organisms when they die? Organisms die. In some cases, animals called scavengers eat the soft parts of the dead organisms. Scavengers eat dead meat. A scavenger is an animal that eats the meat of dead animals. Vultures, hyenas, and ravens are large scavengers. They eat the meat from dead animals that they find, sometimes by waiting for predators to finish their meals. Many insects are scavengers too. In other cases, dead organisms are left to decompose. Say the word, decompose, meaning to rot or break apart. Decompose, squiggle, rot. Organisms called decomposers live by breaking apart once living matter into simpler parts. Bacteria are Earth's most important decomposers. Fungi and many protists are decomposers too. Bacteria and fungi. You might think of decomposers as an inconvenience or a nuisance. For example, if you leave fruits and vegetables for too long in your refrigerator or pantry, the food will rot as decomposers take hold. Farmers face similar problems with almost every crop. In nature, however, decomposers play a very important role. By breaking down old organisms, they return minerals and nutrients to the soil so that new plants can grow. Return minerals and nutrients to soil. Think what would happen without decomposers. Without. Dead organisms and waste would pile higher and higher. Waste pile up. The soil would gradually lose nutrients that would not be returned. Lose nutrients. Before long, plants would stop growing. Plants stop growing. The cycles of most living things would grind to a halt. Cycles halt, arrow, no life. Decomposers. Bracket fungus is a decomposer. It is breaking this dead tree into simpler parts. Scavengers. Ravens are scavengers. They eat the soft parts of dead animals. All right, that's it for the first day. We're halfway through phase 1 of note-taking and phase 2 processing. Good job persevering with a growth mindset, and of course, roar, Wildcats.